Merry Christmas, folks. Happy holidays, and welcome back to episode 525 of #AskGSM. Here today for Wednesday, December 20th, 2023. I am Graham GSM Matthews. Hope you guys are doing well and enjoying your week so far and your holiday season. We're 5 days out from Christmas, which would make this the final episode of the show before the holiday next week. That being Christmas itself, obviously. Hanukkah just passed. Happy Hanukkah for those that celebrate, and all the other holidays out there. Next week will be the final edition of Hashtag in 2023, so I expect a lot of year-end questions, best this, best that, although we've answered quite a bit of those already in the last couple of weeks, but they never get old. It will be fitting for next week, so just a forewarning. Another forewarning that for this episode, I have yet to put all the questions in a document, so if you hear your question here, and then again a little bit later on, it's because I haven't organized them yet. So that's why, for example, for the YouTube questions, I've got a Micah question, a question from Chris, and then Central Man Network, and then Micah again, because I didn't put them in order, because I haven't put them all together in a document. I was busy yesterday, so just a heads up. But if you do want to send in a question to the show for the final episode next week, you can do so by tweeting me on the Twitter machine at WrestleRant with the hashtag AskGSM. Find me on Facebook as well, facebook.com/Graham.GSM.Matthews. Drop a comment on the post I usually put up on Tuesday nights, if not on the wall itself. And last but certainly not least, drop your question down below in the comment section on this very video. I'll include your question in next week's edition. Let's get right into it. Micah does it, as I mentioned before. First question of the episode. Their question was, do you think Warner Brothers Discovery would cancel Tony Khan's TV deal and make a new one going forward with WWE? Do I think that'll happen? No. Is it possible that it happens? Yes. Now, I've seen all the rumblings about WBD. We'll just call them Warner Brothers, because WBD, I feel like I'll mess up those initials. I've seen all the rumblings about Warner Brothers potentially having interest in WWE, potentially there being talks and CM Punk opening the door. I think that might have been overstated, CM Punk opening the door for talks between the two sides. It may have rekindled interest on the Warner Brothers side to bring in WWE. I will say this, I'm not sure what would be worse. I would assume Tony Khan getting the boot from Warner in favor of WWE for Raw, I think would be worse than them both being under the same umbrella. I feel like that'd be a pretty bad situation too. Anyone thinking that would be like a cool idea to both have Raw and then all the AEW shows under the Warner Brothers umbrella, I just feel like that kind of creates a monopoly for those two shows. They're not going to start working together all of a sudden. I don't really see any synergy between the two sides. They would just both be under the same network. So I'd rather just have it be spread out, because it also might hurt AEW's deal with them as well. If WWE signs with them, if AEW were to stick around, they're not getting probably as much money as they were previously. There's no way they get an improvement on the money and get a raise, so to speak, on their TV deal if Raw comes around. There's just no way, assuming they even re-sign with Warner Brothers. I think AEW should stay where they're at, hopefully get a raise from Warner Brothers if Raw doesn't go there. I don't think Raw should go there. I've talked about it before. The idea of Raw on like Amazon or on a streaming service is weird to me. I've never watched a live show on Amazon before. I'm not even honestly sure how that works. I know they've had sports games on there before. Again, where is the live stream for sports on Amazon? I've never seen a live stream on Amazon before. Amazon Prime, that is. Prime Video, whatever the fuck it's called. I'm sure there is. I don't know how to navigate it personally. I'm not exactly sure how that would work. I mean, I have Amazon Prime, so it's not like another thing I have to sign up for, but it would be weird. It would be weird. I'd rather just have it be on a cable network. Now, what that cable network would be, I don't think it's going to be Raw. They already paid a lot of money, NBC did, for SmackDown for, starting in 2024. So I don't think Raw stays on USA. I do think Raw is moving. But the fact that we don't know yet and SmackDown and NXT already have homes, not that it's not a good sign for WWE. They're looking to make a lot more money than they did previously. They're in a great spot to be making more money based on the success they've had financially, creatively in the past year. So I do think they themselves will get a raise in whatever next deal they sign. I don't think it should be with Warner Brothers. I think AEW should stick with them. They should stick with AEW. Because also you have to remember as well, not that I really give a shit about all the shows all the time, but Warner Brothers has built up a great relationship, seemingly on the outside looking in anyway. I don't work there, so I'm not exactly sure. But on the outside looking in, it looks like they've built a great relationship with Warner Brothers. They have Dynamite, they've got Collision, they've gotten Rampage. I know the Collision thing was kind of a CM Punk headed idea, not that Punk came up with it, but the whole premise behind the program that Punk, that would be his show away from the Elite on Dynamite. And Punk could be the face of that brand. And that's not really the case anymore. But you do have Bryan Danielson back, you have Adam Copeland in the company, so I'm not really sure if that changes things. That hasn't really been the case lately. I mean, Bryan Danielson has main evented a lot of Collisions lately because they're doing the Continental Classic. But once that runs out, the issue with Collision was that it was really suffering an identity crisis before the Continental Classic came about. Like, what is this show? What purpose is this show really serving? Is it really just another 2 hours on a Saturday night with a lot of the same people we already see on Wednesdays and sometimes on Fridays? If that's the case, then that's an issue. But it should be for the people like the Thunder Rosas and the Andrades and Miros and Powerhouse Hobbs people of the world. You know, people like that we don't really see a whole lot of on Dynamite. I guess Hobbs we have seen more of on Dynamite. Ricky Starks as well. He's been more on Dynamite lately than in the last probably 8 months. But that's really what Collision should be for. I'm not sure if, Warner likes that idea of having their own show, and it's not CM Punk. All those guys are great. All those guys and girls are great, but they're not CM Punk. The whole idea behind that show originally was that it would be a CM Punk-headed show, and that fell apart pretty quickly after Punk got fired from the company. So, and that's not AEW's fault. I mean, it is Tony Khan's fault that situation got as out of hand as it did last year. That's a whole other conversation. To make a long question short, I don't think that AEW is going anywhere, and I don't think Ross signs there. And I don't think they should. I don't think Warner Brothers should ditch AEW. I don't want to see AEW doing worse. Them getting a worse deal for their own shows is not good either. I think they were originally supposed to make a deal earlier this year, actually, with either Warner Brothers or whoever, before Warner, I think, rolled them over for another year in their contract, which was probably the worst thing they could have done because they were a lot hotter even 6 to 8 months ago than they are right now. Not that AEW was a bad product. AEW was a really, really good product, and the pay-per-views are great, but it's just not what it once was even 8 months ago, 9 months ago, a year ago. A year ago, they were kind of in the fallout from the Elite bullshit with Punk and whatever, but they were a really hot product a year and a half ago, especially when Vince McMahon was still in charge of WWE. They were probably going to get a raise from Warner before they rolled over for another year. So we'll see how it shakes out in 2024. Chris from YouTube as well, do you think that the Main Event Mafia was a success or a failure? I think that it was a success because I can't say it was a success just because it was a memorable faction. I remember the Aces and Eights, and that faction was fucking awful. That's one of the worst, if not the worst, probably not the worst faction in TNA history, because they've had a lot of heel factions in their history, and a lot of them fell apart pretty quickly, or just not that memorable. Like, remember the Beatdown Clan from, 2015 with Kenny King and Samoa Joe? Bobby Lashley was not a part of that. Low-Key, I think, was a part of it. That did not last long. That was a failure. I think Joe left soon after. It might have been 2014 going into 2015. I don't remember. But the faction sucked. Either way, the Main Event Mafia was around the time I started watching TNA. And it's not... The funny thing about that group was it was kind of like their version... I can't even say it was their version of Evolution because the whole purpose of the Main Event Mafia was not to get anyone more over. They were already over. They were all main event guys. That was the whole purpose of the group. There was never any... false pretenses about any of these guys getting to that next level. Like, oh, we're going to really elevate Booker T. Like, Booker T was already a fucking made guy. Kurt Angle already a made guy. Same for Sting, Scott Steiner. Later on, Samoa Joe had already been world champion in TNA by the time he joined months later, which was a disaster. And I like the 2013 version of Main Event Mafia. Short-lived, but I like that version of it as well with Sting and Angle. Sting, Angle, Nick Aldis, and Samoa Joe, and maybe one other person. I don't remember. But as far as the Main Event Mafia, the original incarnation, I would call it a success. I mean, I remember them winning far more matches and championships than the other group, the Frontline, I think is what they called them. The AJ Styles-led group, the group that was, standing up for TNA. I don't really remember much about them and what they did. It was kind of more so about the Main Event Mafia holding the World Championship, that global title, which was completely pointless for as long as they had that, and other championships along the way. The tag team titles as well. It really only lasted about a year from Bound for Glory 08 to Bound for Glory 09, but they had a lot of TV time in that 1 year, and they were on a lot of the main events, and their drama kind of dominated that show for that entire year. So I would call it a success. You could disagree, and I wouldn't blame you, but I would call it a success personally. That was probably one of the better periods in TNA's history, in my opinion. Probably also because I'm nostalgic towards that period, because I grew up on it, having first started watching TNA around that time. Central Man Network from YouTube. Thoughts on the Continental Classic so far? It's reminded me of the Bound for Glory series a decade ago. Who was your winner of the tournament? Yeah, it is very much like the Bound for Glory series, which I also kind of, quote-unquote, grew up on when they did that in, I think they did it in 3 years in a row, 2011, 2012, and 2013, if I'm not mistaken. And that, to me, I mean, I didn't know anything about the G1 Climax at the time, which I assume they were still doing at that point. I don't know when the G1 Climax started, but they were probably already doing it back then. It's probably been going on for decades, and I just don't remember when it first started. But the Bound for Glory series was cool. The Continental Classic basically is the G1 Climax, but in AEW with less people. The Bound for Glory series, were there groups? I don't think there were. I think everyone just kind of faced each other. Like, there were 12 people, and everyone had to face each other once before. And then, like, the leaders of the points, the top 2 leaders of the points faced each other, and the winner would get a championship shot at Bound for Glory. And they stopped doing it in 2014, which was a bummer because I liked the Bound for Glory series. But so far, the Continental Classic has been great. A lot of great matches, and the matches have only gotten better. It's given Collision more to watch for. Collision last week was a great show for those matches alone. It wasn't a bad show anyway, but it made that show much more must-see to tune in to watch those matches. Danielson's been killing it, and they are telling some stories. I mean, the Gold League has had not less stories, but has been less interesting because it's a bit more predictable that either Swerve or Jon Moxley was moving on to the finals. To me, it's kind of clear that it's probably going to... I mean, I can't really say for sure. I feel like it should be Jay White. Moxley and Swerve should cancel each other out, and they should have a match of their own, a rematch from last week at World's End. It might be Swerve and Keith Lee based on what they teased last week on Collision, which would feel like a massive step down for Swerve. I would like to finally get that match, but it's like they should have done it a fucking year ago, and at this point, no one gives a shit about Keith Lee. Swerve's at the top of the world, so it's not really believable that Keith Lee can beat Swerve. And if he does, that's a joke, because Swerve should be winning more matches right now. He should be on a winning streak and building more momentum. Keith Lee should be as well, but that's like going from 0 to 100. From Shane Taylor to Swerve is not really all that, it's not a consistent ascent back to the top of the card for Keith Lee. That's a bit of a jump, in my opinion. But anyway, I think it's going to be Jay White on the gold side, in my opinion. I guess it could be Jon Moxley or it could be Swerve. I don't really think either of them need the Ring of Honor championship and the strong title. Moxley would be logical because he already does all the other companies anyway. He works Indies, he works New Japan, so I could see that. Jay White hasn't. I mean, he used to be in New Japan. He doesn't work Ring of Honor, but I guess he could. On the Blue League side, trying to think, I don't think Eddie Kingston needs to win it and retain his championships. It'd be a cool moment or a cool story, but I don't know. I mean, that would be very possible. I could see Kingston making it all the way to the finals. I could see, obviously, I think it'll be Bryan Danielson. Bryan Danielson makes it all the way to the finals, and I think it's going to be Bryan Danielson and whoever wins from the Gold League. So it's either Jay White, Jon Moxley, or maybe Swerve versus Danielson, and I don't think Danielson wins, so I think whoever advances from the Gold League will win. Jay White doesn't need like the Ring of Honor World Championship, for example, but he already went for the AEW World Championship and lost. So there's really not much more for him to do right now, especially if Christian Cage is the TNT champion and he's a heel. I guess if Adam Copeland wins the TNT title, then you have a babyface in that role, and you could do Jay White and Edge, which is so fucking random, but that's the year of 2024 that we could be entering into, which is kind of crazy to think about. But I think it's more likely he wins the Continental Classic. So far I've been digging it. I think Jay White wins the whole thing. That's my latest prediction. Micah's question, or her second question, what should WWE do with Omos? He's no longer on WWE TV. Is his career over? No, I don't think his career is over. I know Fightful had reported on it a couple of days ago in regards to they see him as an attraction, and they don't really have any creative plans. And really, what kind of plans could they have for the guy? Because anything they could have done with him, they did from 2022 to 2023. Like, he started out as a tag team guy with AJ Styles. They ran that into the ground and did that for like a whole fucking year and a half. And that kind of dissipated. They had success as a tag team. And then he moved on to being his own attraction with MVP as his manager. That to me is really the biggest thing out of all of this, is that MVP is being wasted on the sidelines by Omos not being on TV. Just put MVP back with fucking Bobby Lashley. Not that they need him, but use MVP. He's an amazing manager. Or at least put him with Jade Cargill. I think it was Micah who mentioned that a couple of weeks ago, if not someone else. I love that idea as well. MVP with Jade Cargill, I think, would be a great pairing. And it would at least get MVP back on the show in a prominent position on WWE TV. So I would love to see that. But with Omos, like, they did the tag team thing. He feuded with Bobby Lashley, lost a lot of those matches, disappeared. Came back to feud with Braun Strowman, Lost to Braun. The match wasn't awful. The match was actually pretty passable. Disappeared again. Was in the Rumble. Gets chucked out. Disappears again. Comes back for WrestleMania for a match with Brock fucking Lesnar, which again was pretty passable. Not a terrible match. Not good, not great, but it was okay. Loses that as well. Disappears. Comes back. Faces Rollins at Backlash. Loses. Disappears. You see like the recurring pattern here? And he also reappeared in the Battle Royal at SummerSlam and lost that as well. So like he never wins whenever it matters most, and he shouldn't because he's just not that good. I think the best role for Omos has been what the best role for him always should have been. As a manager, not as a manager, but like as a bodyguard. What he was doing with AJ Styles is probably the best role for him. Not for a guy like with AJ. AJ doesn't need really anyone, but let alone Omos. Put him with someone like a Grayson Waller or someone like that can really benefit from having a heater in their corner. Him or Theory maybe at this point. I'm not complaining that he's not on TV. I mean, he shouldn't get released. I don't want to see anyone get released here. Because he does have value, because he does look, he's fucking massive, and he can be a quote-unquote attraction for them to a certain degree. But when he's in there losing to Rollins, Brock, Strowman, AJ, Bobby Lashley, it's like, all right, I can't really take this guy seriously at this point. I assume he gets dusted off for the Royal Rumble match the next couple of weeks. Don't be surprised to see him resurface on Raw, beat Akira Tozawa, who's kind of out there calling out giants on the Raw roster. Omos comes out, squashes Tozawa, gets in the Rumble match, maybe throws out a few people, and then he gets chucked out. And again, no plans for WrestleMania. Not that there should be. The fact that Omos has had 3 consecutive WrestleMania matches in a row is kind of fucking crazy. Like, he won the tag titles in 2021. He faced Bobby Lashley in 2022 and Brock Lesnar this past year. Like, he's had a pretty consistent string of high-profile matches at WrestleMania. That should be over. I mean, the guy really is not that good. Very nice guy. I've met him a few times. Omos is super nice. Do not need to see him in a prominent position on the show. They can use him for certain stuff, but it gets to a certain point where it just becomes too predictable, and I feel like we're at that point. Unless you shift him to a different, role on the roster where he's a heater for someone else, where he doesn't have to wrestle too often, he can talk when needed. He's not a great talker, but, put MVP with someone else, put Omos with someone else as a heater. I think that's probably the best use of Omos at this stage of his career. Chris's next question, thoughts on Mick Foley's TNA run? I didn't actually mind it that much. When Mick Foley came in again, it was around the same time I started watching TNA in late 2008. And he started out, I think, as an authority figure, right? And then he started to do more matches. I didn't really need to see Mick Foley in the ring. I definitely did not need to see Mick Foley as the TNA World Champion for that short period of time in like the spring of 2009. I wasn't watching it. I mean, I was watching it from week to week, but I wasn't paying close attention to the storylines at that point in time. But like Mick Foley being the TNA champion at that stage was pretty fucking ridiculous. But like he went on to do stuff with Abyss and other people. He was involved in the ECW angle in 2010. By that point, he wasn't really on the show all that much. And then he went back to WWE in 2011. Early on, I thought he was a pretty cool part of the show. I enjoyed his authority run. I remember when he was like an authority figure on the show, and then he turned heel. I remember being very entertained by that. I didn't really need to see him in the ring having matches with fucking Abyss and Stevie Richards. The Abyss match as like an attraction for like, oh, Cactus Jack versus this other hardcore guy named Abyss, which was basically Kane, obviously, was kind of cool. But beyond that, him as like a regular member of the roster wasn't really necessary. But early on, I really enjoyed his run in TNA. Was it necessary? No, but he wanted to get out of WWE and still wanted to make money, so I guess it made sense. His next question, Scott D'Amore is stating that they are signing one of the biggest free agents they have ever signed in Impact Wrestling history. Who do you think it is? If that's what he said specifically, because I remember seeing a couple days ago, I saw what they tweeted about, one of the biggest, when worlds collide, you'll never guess who's showing up. I don't know if that's in reference to what you're talking about, because that graphic didn't make it sound like that whoever they were bringing in for that show is someone they were signing. But if it is someone they were signing and that's not something separate and it's all the same thing, I'm honestly not really sure. Because Okada would be awesome, because Okada's apparently a free agent in 2024. Will Ospreay would have been huge. Punk would have been huge. Punk's already back in WWE. Will Ospreay's already signed to the AEW. And Okada shouldn't go to Impact. But the thing with Okada is that I don't think... Like, his contract's up in late January 2024, as was Will Ospreay's, and he made a deal early, obviously. But he's already going to be at the tapings the next night. So I feel like if they were going to announce him as a big signing, they wouldn't have announced him for that next night's show. I mean, I guess they could. I don't think it's Okada. I don't think Okada would go there anyway. I think Okada, if he were to come to the States, which I don't think he is, AEW would probably make the most sense. And then WWE. Impact, TNA is great. I love TNA. But they're just not the platform that Okada probably should be on at this point in his career, being one of the best in the world. I love TNA, but still, we got to be realistic here. Mercedes Moné is not to be one counted out. I do think she ends up back in WWE. We talked about that already in previous weeks. But I don't know. Her and TNA is not something that you can doubt completely because, again, Trinity's there. They're really good friends. Obviously, they both walked out of WWE together last year. She can go there and really dominate that division. Camille would be cool. Camille is not the biggest free agent they've ever signed. I think Camille probably could end up in TNA. I think she could probably show up as soon as that Hard to Kill pay-per-view because she's a free agent, I believe, at the end of the year. She would get lost in the shuffle, I think, even though, for as tall and as big as she is, they already kind of have women like that right now in AEW and WWE. AEW, they would just have fucking nothing for, I guarantee you. In WWE, they already have women of that stature. Jade, Rhea's not as big as Camille, but, she's that powerhouse. Nia Jax, they just brought back. They have Raquel. They don't really need Camille right now, so I think she should probably go to TNA. That being said, she's not the biggest free agent they've ever signed. So I'm honestly not really sure. I sure as fucking hope it's not like Goldberg or someone like that, I don't think it is, but, I'm not really... if it were to be one of the free agents that got fired from WWE, none of those guys even come close to being the biggest signing they've ever had. Dolph Ziggler is cool. Dolph would be a great get for them. The biggest signing they've ever had would be ridiculous. Would be completely ridiculous. I do think Ziggler still shows up in AEW. His brother's there. He has a lot of friends on that roster. Not that he doesn't in TNA. In TNA, he would have more of a spotlight to do his own thing and really get over at a higher level. Dolph is not a big... he's a big free agent. He will do well in Impact. But one of the biggest free agents they've ever signed, that would be completely fucking ridiculous. It's fucking Dolph Ziggler. I saw this guy losing to Omos 6 months ago on Raw. He's just not as big of a deal as he would have been 5-10 years ago if he were to leave WWE. He's not going to make that same splash. It would make a splash and it would be interesting, but you can't hype it up the way that they are, only to fall flat. So... I guess we'll see. I guess my official prediction would be Mercedes Moné, because she's the only one that's a free agent that would be a big, maybe not difference maker for TNA, but it would make a big splash, because she is a big, big star. But I'm not even really sure that's all that likely either, because I feel like Sasha, as I mentioned, is probably going back to WWE at some point in the next 6 months, if not sooner. Next question from Chris. You mentioned that you're a fan of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. The truth is, I'm only a huge fan of the first one, Curse of the Black Pearl. I was almost 13 when it came out, and to me it felt different from anything Disney was churning out at the time. To this day, I will always watch it on TV as it is an incredibly entertaining and watchable movie with fantastic music and great set pieces and characters. Dead Man's Chest, while not a great movie, is a guilty pleasure. The others I could care less about. How would you rank the movies in order from bad to good? You know what's funny? When I first read your question, I'm thinking of only ranking 1, 2, and 3. I don't even consider 4 and 5 a part of the franchise. And I guess if you do, and they are a part of the franchise, I forgot they even existed. I've watched them before. I've seen the fourth one a few times. I saw that one in theaters when it came out 12 years ago, 13 years ago. The fifth one I did not see in theaters. I just completely missed that one because it looked fucking terrible. I watched it on Netflix about a year or two later, and it was exactly what I thought it would be, just not a good movie. If we're ranking the movies, I'm going to be honest with you, and this is a bold prediction. Not a bold prediction, a bold opinion. A hot take, as they say. I like 1, 2, and 3 more than the last one, if that makes sense. So I think 1 is a classic movie. Everyone will say that 1 is the best, and I completely understand that. That is a very popular opinion. To me, and maybe they're not better movies. I'm not a movie critic. I just kind of go off of what I enjoy. I like 2 more than 1, and I like 3 more than 2. I think 2 does a great job of setting up 3. It's pretty much a setup, transitional movie. Probably doesn't need to be as long as it is, but there are a lot of great scenes, specifically at the end. The last 20 minutes of that movie are great, and that not post-credit scene, but that movie closing scene, if you know what I'm talking about, is one of my favorite in cinematic history, and that is not a fucking stretch. That last 15 to 20 seconds of the movie is the best part of that movie, and it's an amazing movie, and it's an amazing ending as well. But I love 3 even more than 2, and I like 2 even more than 1. 1 is, again, a classic movie. Everyone will tell you that's the best one, and I completely understand that. But I just have a certain affinity for those latter 2 movies. Because I think the first one came out in 2003. I'm sure I saw that in theaters when it came out. I saw the second one and the third one in theaters. I saw the fourth one in theaters, but it just wasn't that good. They all connect together. They blew off the saga, the trilogy, beautifully with that third movie. That one scene when they're on the ship and the bad guy ship, quote-unquote, is getting destroyed to bits with the cannons and the guys just walking through the smoke is one of my favorite scenes, again, in cinematic history. Not exaggerating. It's an amazing shot. Makes no sense, but it's not supposed to. It's a movie about pirates and curses and dumb shit like that. They get more ridiculous as the movies go on with the curses and stuff like that, but it's pirate bullshit, so it is what it is. Completely ridiculous stuff. It's a guilty pleasure. All 3 movies I love. But to me, if I were to rank them, I would do, and again, this is not a popular opinion, 3, then 2, then 1, then 4, then 5. 5 was just abysmal. 4 was mediocre. Didn't really need to happen. 5 was extremely forgettable. 4 even a little less so, but still, at least it had, I think Javier Bardem is in the 5th one. And the 4th one is, isn't Blackbeard the guy from John Wick? The guy in charge of the Continental Hotel? I almost said the Continental Classic. The Continental Hotel. I think that's the bad guy for 4, and then the 5th one is, and I forgot his name. But the 5th one is Javier Bardem, who I love. I loved Javier Bardem in Skyfall, the 007 movie. But that 5th movie is just complete ass. His next question, ever since the breakup of Toxic Attraction, Gigi Dolan hasn't really been able to find her footing in the NXT women's division. Why do you feel Shawn Michaels has an issue with booking her the right way at the moment? I mean, honestly, I agree with the booking aspect of it, but I also feel like part of it is on Gigi herself. Anytime I've seen her in the ring doing she just hasn't really had a standout match in a very long time. I think Gigi's great. I like Gigi a lot. I honestly like her a lot more than I like JC Jane. I feel like JC Jane's a bit too over the top sometimes with their facial expressions and promos and shit. Gigi Dolan isn't amazing, but I do like her more than JC Jane. That being said, though, not that JC's having standout matches herself, although she's not bad, in her own right. Anytime I've seen Gigi in the ring on the show, or even on Level Up or on Main Event or whatever, she's just not having great matches. The matches with Blair Davenport, they may have had a couple, were not great. Even the matches with JC Jane really weren't that great. The first 2 were incredibly forgettable, and the last one was probably the best of the bunch, the Weaponized Steel Cage match, and she won that and amounted to nothing. So that was a booking issue, where she won that, she had momentum, and they went on to do absolutely nothing with her, and that was over 6 months ago. And since then, she's done nothing. But it's not like she's out there having classic matches. Now, could you also make the argument it's because she's not being given the opportunity to go out there and have great matches? Sure, you can argue that. I've seen her have longer matches. I've seen her have shorter matches, and none of those matches have really been all that great, and she just hasn't looked all that great in those matches. So I don't know if it's something with her herself where she's kind of off her game and there's something else going on. I'm not exactly sure. But other people have made the comment that she's regressed in the ring, and it's kind of hard to argue with that based on the matches she was having a few years ago, based on, compared to what she's doing now. I remember seeing, I know John Ritland saw it, because I remember you asking me about it a couple years ago. She had an excellent match on that NWA show, Shockwave, against Thunder Rosa, when Thunder Rosa was still in NWA, and Gigi was right before she went to WWE. They had a great match on an NWA Shockwave show. She hasn't had anything remotely close to that since coming to WWE. Maybe it just doesn't really fit her style. I don't know. But she's been given the opportunity to have memorable matches, and that steel cage match with JC was pretty good. Nothing since then has been really all that standout great. JC's had some more opportunities. She's had some decent matches. Gigi kind of feels like she's regressed in the ring from where she was. Again, I don't know if that's a booking issue, because they're not giving her the time to go out there and have good matches, or if it's a Gigi issue and she just really isn't at the same level where she was about a year ago, and I'm not exactly sure why that would be the case. Joe M., the last question from YouTube before we move on to Facebook. His question was, do you think there's a double standard with how fans would complain nonstop back in the day about how John Cena wouldn't put over talent back in the day, but you don't hear them complaining about about some of their favorites doing the same? For example, there was no reason for AJ Styles to beat Karrion Kross once, let alone 3 times. Kevin Owens has made Waller and Theory look like jokes for weeks, including beating the latter with a broken hand. On AEW side, Swerve has been on the roll of a lifetime, yet for some reason, Jon Moxley had to go over him. No, I don't think it's the same thing. With John Cena, he was the only guy at the top of the card from what, 05? I mean, not the only guy, but on the Raw brand, he was the guy from like 05 through 2012, 2013. And he did put over people along the way. He put over Punk in Chicago, put over Rock, that young upstart Rock at WrestleMania 28, along with other people, and like the Nexus when he didn't really need to, but he won when he shouldn't have. That's a whole other issue. The difference with John Cena and all the other people you mentioned was that whether he did or did not, John Cena, we know for a fact, did have some sort of clout in the company when he was on top. I'm not blaming him for every burial of every top star from that period. Umaga and, Alex Riley and people like that. Like the Riley thing, he never really discussed it himself. He's never really gone into detail about it for whatever reason. He's been out of the business for so long, like who gives a shit at this point? But with Cena, we knew that he had some sort of pull in the company, including with the Nexus thing coming from two very reliable sources. I mean, say what you will about what JTG has said about Cena and Alex Riley, and they haven't called John Cena like an awful person, but that if they said something to him or they did something that kind of rubbed him the wrong way, where he kind of felt like his spot was threatened by fucking JTG, who gives a shit? Not that I don't like JTG, but is JTG really a threat to your position on the show? Probably not. I don't know if they've ever really called him a bad person or whatever. I'm not really sure that can be disputed. Cena seems like an amazing person. But, when people would come close to his spot, we know for a fact, like with Jericho and Edge, again, say what you will about Riley and JTG and all these other people, Jericho and Edge are pretty reliable sources. I mean, they're top talent. They have no reason to disparage Cena if they don't have to. Not that they were burying him, but they made it pretty clear in that podcast about a decade ago that Cena specifically changed the finish to that match at SummerSlam 2010 for him to go over, and then thankfully he realized after the fact, I mean, not really thankfully because it was too late by that point, then he made the wrong call, thinking, we probably shouldn't have done that. Well, no shit, because the way you defeated the Nexus on that show at SummerSlam 2010 was so one-sided, it put them at such a disadvantage, it ruined any and all momentum that group had. They went on to last for another 6 months. It just wasn't the same. He fucking buried the entire group in one fucking night. And there were other examples of that when Cena was on top. Again, not to disparage Cena as like a person, but as a performer, kind of had that Hogan effect. Not as Hogan identically. He's not exactly Hogan. I mean, Hogan did a lot of bad shit and a lot of dumb shit. Cena's not bad at all in that case, in that sense. But he was guilty of some stuff where he probably should have gone to bat for this guy or put over that guy. Not to be incredibly giving, but he could have lost a little bit more than he did. So other people can come up to his level. The other people, I don't think AJ was sitting there saying, I need to beat Karrion Kross 3 times. Or Owens is saying, I need to beat Waller in theory every time. I think that's the biggest difference. And they're also not main event storylines. Cena beating the Nexus and beating Bray Wyatt, for example, that wasn't a main event match, but a WrestleMania 30. I don't really blame Cena for that. That to me kind of seems like a WWE Vince McMahon issue, where they really wanted Wyatt to lose that Mania because it would be the happy, feel-good ending for that feud, even though it continued after that and it was fucking awful. That to me is a bigger example because like Karrion Kross, I mean, you're talking about, yeah, you're right. Styles did not need to be Kross 3 times. But I don't think it's Styles' call to say, I'm going to be Karrion Kross 3 times. And, I mean, Kross was already dead in the water well before that. I mean, Kross lost to Drew, Ray, Nakamura, AJ multiple times, Bobby Lashley last week. I mean, Karrion Kross has bigger issues than losing to AJ Styles. With Theory and Waller, they're just not at that level. Owens is way more over than Theory and Waller. They're great, and they'll be over as heels, or at least Waller will be, even in a loss. Owens should be moving on to the next portion of that program. Waller and Theory, they got their heat on Owens on certain, episodes of SmackDown. Not as much as Owens got the better of them, obviously. I understand that. But it's just not the same thing. That's a meaningless mid-card program. Who gives a shit if Waller and Theory go over? They're not going to be elevated by beating Kevin Owens anyway at this point. Definitely not Theory, who feels dead in the water anyway. And with Swerve, again, it's not the same thing. We don't know where they're going with Swerve and Moxley. I'm the first one to shit on AEW's booking if they do something dumb. I wasn't a fan of that outcome either, but I feel like, to me, they would have done that for a reason. Tony Khan I got to give him credit because he did the right thing by putting over Swerve twice. Not just once, but twice. I didn't even think he would do it once. Over Adam Page on pay-per-view. That tells me he knows that Swerve is on the rise. He's got something organically great in him. He's over. He's got momentum. He's not going to fuck that up by just having him lose to Jon Moxley and then not go anywhere after that. Like I said earlier, I feel like there's a chance that it can't cost Moxley his next match because there's no interference in these matches. Maybe they could sneak it in. I'm not sure. That would be cheap. I don't really want to see it, but there is a way that you can kind of do this where you can set up Swerve and Moxley for World's End, for Swerve to get revenge, beats him there, and then Jay White moves on to the finals of the Continental Classic from the Gold League. I think Swerve will be perfectly fine. Swerve's not buried because he lost to Jon Moxley. Cena literally burying people, including burying Bray Wyatt under a bunch of steel steps back in 2014 to Payback, which I will never forget, is just remotely not the same thing. Now, I honestly, with that question, I thought you were going to talk about Roman Reigns. Roman Reigns' run should have ended a while ago, and he could have put over a lot more people than he has, because you can't put over people while still being champion. That would require him losing the title. He doesn't need to be champion right now, as for as long as he has been. He definitely could have lost it at WrestleMania. It would have been perfectly fine. I honestly thought you were going to mention Roman Reigns, but instead you mentioned all these other instances that really don't matter in the grand scheme of things. I understand what you're talking about, but to me, in my opinion anyway, it's not remotely the same thing. Moving on to the Facebook questions, first from Noel. Their first question was saying, first and foremost, Merry Christmas to everyone. Merry Christmas to you as well. I appreciate that. They said, who would you say has had the best run in WWE this year / the worst run? The best run has got to be Gunther. I mean, there's been a lot of great people in WWE that have had great years. Cody had a great year. Rollins had a great year going unpinned for all but one day in the year. But even that, I mean, Rollins, his character work has just not been the best. It's been great at some points and not great at others. Gunther has just been consistently great all fucking year. He's been gradually built up, beating bigger and bigger names, defended the championship on pay-per-view, match of the year candidates, brought that championship to another level, broke the record for the longest reigning Intercontinental Championship reign of all time. It's got to be Gunther, in my opinion. Worst run? I don't know. I mean, there's so many people that I just can't really... I'm trying to think. Who's even on like the roster that I would consider had like a bad run in 2023? I feel like Triple H is done right by a lot of people. I mean, I guess you can include the release talent like Dolph. Like Dolph did nothing this year. He was gone for most of the year. I guess you could say him. But like if you're talking like of a bigger talent who did not have a great year, Karrion Kross had a fucking lousy year. Probably Karrion Kross. The guy can just never win whenever it matters most. He lost, like I said, Drew, Ray, Nakamura, Styles, Bobby Lashley, probably others as well. And it's just not remotely over. I think Karrion Kross is great. Maybe not great in the ring. He's pretty good in the ring. The character stuff is great. I love the vignettes. But he's just not over because no one can take him seriously because he never fucking wins. So probably him. He's probably had the most disappointing year of them all, in my opinion. Second question, also from Noel. Do you see Mercedes Martinez coming back to WWE, and do you see her using the name Sasha Banks again? Although, also on the Liv Morgan. We'll get to the Liv Morgan thing in a second. As far as Mercedes goes, yes, I do see her going back to WWE, and now that I say that, she'll probably go to Impact. Because I thought she would go... the funny thing with the Mercedes thing is that she constantly keeps us guessing. I thought she would go back to WWE a year ago after she walked out, and she instead became a free agent and went to Japan. When I thought she would go to AEW at the beginning of the year or after All In, that's where I thought she would end up. She didn't go there, and she might still not go there, which is kind of surprising because they kind of set it up, but seemingly per Fightful, those plans fell through. And now that I think she's going back to WWE, just watch her go to TNA instead. Very possible. But if she were to come back to WWE, she would obviously have to be Sasha Banks. They just have so much built-in equity with the name. She was Sasha Banks for a decade. People know the name. Not that they won't know Mercedes Moné. She can bring whatever she was doing as Mercedes Moné to WWE if they really want to repackage her. I mean, Sasha Banks is a made person at this point. She's a made woman. You don't really need to repackage Sasha Banks, but if she wants to bring those elaborate outfits, which aren't really my cup of tea, but if she wants to start doing that in WWE and give it a shot, I guess she can. So that's possible, but she would be Sasha Banks. If she were to go back to WWE, she would 1,000% be Sasha Banks. Like Drew McIntyre. I mean, it's not the same thing, but when he left WWE, he went by Drew Galloway, which is his real name. And he built up a lot of equity with his real name as Drew Galloway in all these indie companies and in TNA. But when he came back to WWE, he was always Drew McIntyre, so he came back as Drew McIntyre. That's what I kind of see happening with Sasha Banks as well. Their second part of the question, also though, on the Liv Morgan arrest, do you see her losing her push? I don't. I don't really think the arrest will make much of a difference. It was for like a weed-related thing, which I guess isn't legal in Florida. I'm not a weed guy at all, personally. I fucking hate this stuff. I've never tried this stuff, but I'm not a weed person. But even I can recognize, listen, I mean, it's legal now, so why the fuck would you need to arrest someone for it? Now, if it was affecting her driving, if she was high while driving, that's a big issue. I mean, that's pretty fucked up. We don't know exactly what the details are as far as that goes. I mean, that's an issue. But I don't really see it affecting her push. It's really not that big of a deal. I remember it affected Jack Swagger's push. I mean, he might have been drinking, though. He had weed on him when he got that big push back in early 2013. He got busted for that. Wasn't arrested or wasn't... He may have been suspended after Mania. I don't remember. But he ended up getting like no entrance at Mania, and the World Heavyweight Championship match went like 7 minutes. That was clearly a punishment for him getting arrested a month earlier on the road to WrestleMania. Would he have beaten Del Rio for the title? Probably not anyway, but him getting arrested did not help. So, I mean, that was a decade ago. The world's different. The shit's legal now. It's kind of accepted that people do the shit. I mean, WWE made a whole gimmick about Matt Riddle being being high all the time. They made a 420 RK Bro shirt back in 2022. I mean, I feel like it'd be dumb for them to really punish her for something so small, unless it was affecting her driving and she was swerving or something, which is possible. Beyond that, though, I don't really see it affecting her push. I feel like she'll come back and it'll be in the same spot as she was previously before the arrest. I mean, to get arrested is a bummer, but for something like this, I don't really think it's that big of a deal. Moving on now to, let's see, Chris L's questions. We have a lot of questions to get to, so I probably won't spend a lot of time on each one here. But his first one says, first and foremost, hope you and everyone have a holly jolly Christmas. I appreciate that, Chris. Thank you. He says, you have been watching professional wrestling for 15 years, and I've been watching it for 27. And one of the universal feelings is that a certain wrestler we like or have a fond respect for does not get his just due and get a chance with the World Championship. For me, men like Ravishing Rick Rude, Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig, Scott Hall, and Rowdy Roddy Piper all had the charisma and tools to be a world champion, but were never given the chance. Even from modern-day wrestling guys like Christopher Daniels, Chad Gable, and Wade Barrett all had the tools, but they never got the chance. Who do you see as someone who will never get a fair shake of being world champion? It's funny that you mentioned the name that really comes to mind is someone who probably, I mean, he's a fucking idiot now. I mean, this wasn't the name I'm thinking of, but Ryback, for one, probably could have been a world champion in 2012, 2013, and it just fell through. Cody Rhodes was also in that group, but obviously he's going to win the world championship now that he's back and he's a bigger star than he was before. But Wade Barrett was always, to me, the guy that I wanted to see more than anyone in 2010, 2011, 2012 as world champion, and he was just never afforded that opportunity. So that, to me, not that he's one of the greatest wrestlers ever, never win a world championship. As far as like on today's roster, who will never be a world champion? That's a good question. Now that we have 2 titles, I mean, it's a lot easier now to win a world championship than it would have been even, a couple of years ago, last year, 7 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever. I'm trying to think. Chad Gable will never be a world champion. He might be the Intercontinental Champion, but he will never be the world champion. I feel like we could just make that clear right now. But I never really expected him to be at that level anyway. I just wanted to see him do more than do the fucking tag team shit, which he's been doing for years now. Chad Gable, maybe. Christopher Daniels is another great one because I always thought he should have been a world champion in TNA. At least he won a world championship in a Ring of Honor. That was better than nothing. So at least he had that. Like in AEW, honestly, if Samoa Joe doesn't win the world... Samoa Joe's another one. He should have been a world champion in WWE. He should fucking be the world champion in AEW as well. I'm going to be pretty pissed. If he loses to MJF at World's End, a broken down MJF who clearly is legitimately hurt, I'll be pretty upset because that's to me is just dumb. You don't give Samoa Joe 2 title shots and have him lose both times. The guy's one of the best in the company that they have, and he's not even in the prime of his career. And the same thing in his WWE run. The guy was great in WWE. They never gave him a single world championship run. He had a lot of opportunities to win a world championship, but it was through no fault of his own. It's not like he did get suspended in early 2020, but it's not like they were going to put the world championship on him at that point anyway. I would go with Samoa Joe. I feel like Samoa Joe not winning a world championship in WWE was egregious, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on Joe Gacy? I feel like while he has charisma, he had a rough uphill climb due to the on-the-nose PC character, who all of a sudden becomes a dark cult leader. I feel that his rivalry with Braun Breaker for the title, he became too overexposed and showed that he was a good mid-carder who isn't good enough to be a main event guy. That whole rivalry made I honestly completely forgot about that feud. That whole rivalry made absolutely no sense to me since those two never interacted once before Braun won the title. After that feud, to me, he unfortunately became creative cancer, and the stuff with the dyad was embarrassingly dull and idiotic, and now he's stuck in another channel-changing gimmick. How high do you think his ceiling is once he hits the main roster, and how do you feel about Joe Gacy as a whole? I think Joe Gacy's a really good wrestler. I think he does a good job of committing to the character. The shit that they've had him do in the past 2 years has been fucking awful. I'm sorry. Like, they tried with the Dark Cult stuff. He committed to it. He committed to the PC nonsense bullshit. That was even worse. But the characters were awful. Like, whatever he's doing now, I appreciate him trying something different. Will it stick? I don't know. I just don't see... In a company that has so many people that could and should be a world champion, or at least high up on the card, Joe Gacy, to me, is not a guy that I need to see, he needs to be Intercontinental Champion. No, there's a lot of people in NXT right now that I would rather see at that level than him. Nothing against him, but it's like, not that it's the exact same thing, but like QT Marshall. He's not a bad worker. He's actually pretty darn good. But first of all, he's just boring as fuck. But like with QT Marshall, he's another one. People are like, he wants to be a superstar. Bro, there's like 1 million people in both companies that belong at that level more than you. And it's not a matter of what he deserves. It's a matter of it's a business. Who belongs at that level, at the World Championship or even mid-card level? QT Marshall ain't that guy. He is just not that guy. And Joe Gacy is, I think, better than QT Marshall, but he's another guy where, like, for as good as he is, he's a good worker and whatnot. There are other people in NXT and even on the main roster right now who are not being utilized the way they should be, who deserve that opportunity and belong in that spot more than he does, in my opinion. His next question, what do you think, the best Royal Rumble shows where the Royal Rumble matches and the undercards all delivered? It's a good question. I feel like the 2020 Rumble was a great show. Baron Corbin and Roman Reigns, I know, that sounds awful, but they had a pretty good Falls Count Anywhere match in 2020. I think that was the same show where The Fiend and Daniel Bryan had a strap match for the Universal Championship that was actually pretty good. They worked well together on that show. Brock was in the Rumble. I think that show also had Bayley and Lacey Evans, and that wasn't great, but the rest of that show was pretty fucking great. So probably the Rumble in 2020. As far as like the other ones, I guess you can go maybe Rumble 2013, because the Rumble match was pretty good. That show also had Punk and Rock, which was a massive match. Del Rio and Big Show had a pretty fun, it might have been I thought it was Last Man Standing. It was probably just a regular match. I don't remember, for the World Heavyweight Championship at the Rumble. And that was a pretty good match as well. I'm not sure if that would be it. The Rumble 2000, I remember overall being a pretty good show. That might be it. I'm trying to think of like overall best Royal Rumble shows. Maybe Rumble 02 might be another one. I'd have to go back and watch it. The other ones I'm trying to remember that had like really good matches on them or like really stood out. The Rumble in 08, just for the atmosphere in Madison Square Garden, I think that was the show where JBL and Jericho had their like blood match. It wasn't labeled a blood match, where they ended up like beating the fuck out of each other. Orton and Jeff Hardy had a pretty good match. Edge and Rey Mysterio. I remember that card. I wasn't even a fan for that show, but like, I remember watching it back and it being memorable. So probably Rumble 08, Rumble 2020, 2000, and 02 are the ones that come to mind. Probably some before that, but I honestly can't remember much of what happened on the other Rumble shows prior to 2000. His other question, what are your thoughts on Tony Khan's comments from the Ring of Honor media scrum? Can't comment on it because I have not seen the media scrum, but if you're talking about like him, I assume what you were referring to is what made the rounds after it was over, because I did see that, where he was talking about how AEW was under constant attack, blah, blah, blah. If that's what you're referring to, I did see that. That was the only part of the scrum I did see. That was embarrassing to me, because it's like, dude, WWE's under constant attack. This other company's under constant attack. Like, boo fucking who? Sorry, I don't have sympathy for a billionaire guy that wants to play with his wrestling company and all this other shit. I think Tony Khan's brilliant. I think he seems like a great dude, and he's done a great job with AEW. But this woe is me bullshit where it's like we have a great show and people still complain. That's fucking life, pal. That is life. That's not a wrestling thing. That's not an AEW thing. That is a life thing. Any company could do something great, and there's always going to be people that are going to complain about whatever. Right or for wrong, people will always have an opinion, and there will always be people that don't like it. And I don't even think it's the wide majority of people. Like, All In went great, and if he's talking about, people still weren't happy. Bro, that show went over really, really well. What the fuck are you talking about? Anyone that was complaining about that or them having this, record-breaking gate for All In and selling as many tickets as they did, probably just don't fucking like AEW. Now, there's a lot of people that have constructive criticism about the company, but that shit just gets drowned out in all the other dumbasses. You just kind of have to weed your way through and differentiate the people that just hate AEW because they hate the company and the people that don't like certain things that they do because they want to see the company be better. I feel like he says this shit because he spends way too much time on social media. Get the fuck off of Twitter, change the password, and stop worrying about... listen to the fans, but don't worry about what every single little person thinks about your company. Because it's just not healthy. And it's going to result in the mindset of, woe is me, everyone's against us, and everyone has negative things to say. WWE's been dealing with that, probably justifiably, because their product was ass a lot of the time for the past 15 years. But, they've been dealing with that shit forever. Triple H has said a lot of dumb stuff. I'm not saying he hasn't. But, I haven't heard him say in one of these scrums they do after the WWE shows, you people are never happy. And honestly, maybe even if he's thinking that, at least don't say it publicly, because it just doesn't sound... It makes you look bad. And it made Tony Khan look bad. Honestly, whether you agree with him or not, I don't agree with that. People will always be unhappy, but it's probably not the vast majority. A lot of those people just want to see the company fail, and that is an issue. But this whole thing about everyone wants to see us fail, I don't know if he said that specifically. I don't think he did. But him painting this picture and spelling out the narrative that they could do something great and people are still upset, that's called fucking life. I don't really know what to tell you. Last question of his, who do you think is the more complete pro wrestler, Will Ospreay or Seth Rollins? While I think Seth is an incredible in-ring talent, his flamboyant behavior during his entrance and promos can harm his aura. Ospreay, on the other hand, is not only able to make his sport look easy, but his Conor McGregor-like promos and mannerisms make him more believable as a champion. While Rollins can be tremendous on the mic, like he was last week with CM Punk, those types of promos can come by every now and then, whereas Ospreay's intensity is always there. So no bias, but I pick Ospreay as the more complete package. What about you? That's a great question. I want to lean Rollins because I feel like with Will Ospreay's promos, they've improved. I feel like right now the answer is Rollins. Yeah, the flamboyant bullshit is fucking terrible. But honestly, overall in Rollins' career, he's cut a lot of great promos over the course of his run. What he's doing right now is an issue with the whole, everyone's singing my song, and I'm going to come out here dressed like an idiot, blah, blah, blah. But looking at the grand scheme of his career, he is a far better mic worker than Will Ospreay. I'm not even sure if that can be debated, to be honest. Will Ospreay can be great, and he's only getting better. But I've seen a lot of Will Ospreay promos that were just rambling, and he's cut some good ones. But I feel like Rollins, not that he's the best talker in the world for wrestlers, I feel like he is consistently better. And Will Ospreay has more hit or miss promos, in my opinion. And I don't watch his work as much as I do Rollins, obviously. That's probably where I went wrong here. I would go Rollins. I feel like Rollins is the guy, when you have the right character for him, can be an overall guy that people can connect with. Ospreay is better in the ring, but the overall aura is Rollins, in my opinion. I just feel like he's more of a superstar, probably because he's been at the WWE level for so long. He's a proven commodity at the main event. He's never really been below that. Yeah, he's held the tag titles and the mid-card titles, but he's always been a top guy. Not that Ospreay, not that he hasn't been a top guy, but Ospreay's still young in his career and his promos. I can't name any great promos that he's... again, I don't watch his work consistently, so it's hard to say. I feel like, honestly to me, the answer right now is Rollins. But the answer in another 2 or 3 to 5 years will probably be Ospreay. Because I feel like by that point, when Ospreay has more experience and more opportunities to cut promos in AEW on TV, then he'll become more of a complete performer than he is right now. And he's already amazing, don't get me wrong. If you say Ospreay, there's nothing wrong with that opinion. I say Rollins right now, not by much, but I feel like Ospreay long term, not even Rollins will be broken down by 5 years from now. I'm just talking overall. Ospreay, at the age that Rollins is right now, will probably be more of a complete performer than Rollins is currently. just because I feel like Ospreay can get there with more experience. He just hasn't had it yet because he's been in Japan for like fucking 10 years. Next question from Twitter. Like I said, we got a lot of questions. We're already 55 minutes in here. We had a lot of questions this week, and a lot of great questions. So it is the Christmas week episode. We got to fill this stuff in here, and it's my Christmas gift to you. But at Iwagu91, their first question was saying, first off, I hope you and Alexis will have a Merry Christmas. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. He says, with day one being the edition of Raw for 2024, what are the odds that NXT and SmackDown will have their day one editions? They will, but they will not be called day one. The whole point of day one is that it's January 1st, obviously. I mean, I guess you could call, NXT and SmackDown that week day one, but they're not. So what they're doing instead, and this has already been confirmed, I didn't read the SmackDown spoilers, but I did hear about this. NXT that Tuesday, we already know, is New Year's Evil. That much was already obvious. So we have New Year's Evil on that Tuesday, the first week of 2024. And then the first SmackDown of 2024 is going to be called New Year's Revolution. They're bringing that back. And I was so fucking pissed a couple years ago. How do you have a day one, like a fucking pay-per-view on New Year's Day and not call it New Year's Revolution? And they called it day one instead. I was like, what the fuck? But they are calling this New Year's Revolution, that edition of SmackDown, coming up in a few weeks, which is awesome. So that's going to be a pretty stacked week in WWE. His next question, and again, these questions are all over the place because I haven't organized them yet, so just keep that in mind. But he said, your thoughts on Kushida signing with TNA/Impact. It's a great pickup for TNA. I think he's great. He's had a pretty good run there in the time that he's spent in the last year and a half in TNA Impact. Kushida is one of my favorites personally. I just actually met him at a TNA show, the Impact 1000 celebration back in September. Really cool guy. And probably the best place for him. I'm sure he could do great stuff in New Japan, but been there, done that for him. And he probably won't get a big push in either AEW or WWE, so going to TNA makes the most sense. And he has his buddies there as well, and Chris Sabin and Alex Shelley, so it makes the most sense for him to be there. At Kyle Rochelle 19, who will Bianca Belair face now at WrestleMania, now that Charlotte is injured? It's a good question. I'm honestly not really sure. I feel like they'll probably shoehorn her into a title match with Io and Bayley, which I do not want to see. At this point, I was worried that they would make it Charlotte, Bianca, Bayley, and Io. And even that I didn't want to see because it's like they don't need to be a part of that match. It really should be Bayley and Io one-on-one. But without Charlotte, it's even worse that Bianca would still be involved because she's been feuding with Damage Control now for a fucking year and a half. There's no reason for that feud to continue. Zero reason for that feud to continue. So that's probably what it'll be. But if it's not that, I'm not really sure. I mean, maybe they could do something as an attraction match because I wanted to see Charlotte and Bianca face each other. Not in a four-way, but one-on-one. Now that Charlotte's out indefinitely and that match is definitely not happening, honestly, maybe without much build, depending on how you do it, maybe Jade Cargill. Jade Cargill should probably go to NXT first, I know. But if you want to bring her in as a big attraction and establish her as a big deal right out of the gate, have her go in there and beat Bianca at WrestleMania. End her little WrestleMania streak. I know that's a dream match you can build to, but you can also do it out of the gate, have Jade win, and then Bianca has to fight to get that win back at some point down the road. I don't know. Because if it's not Jade, I'm not really sure. Do you call up Tiffany Stratton? I mean, that's possible. It could be Tiffany and Bianca, to be honest. That wouldn't be a bad idea either. At Iwagu91, it's being rumored that Nick Nemeth, formerly known as Dolph Ziggler, will join TNA Impact. Do you believe this to be true? I think he's still going to AEW, but if that's the big signing, that's still a disappointment. I like Dolph. I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do outside of WWE. He's not a game changer. He can get a good big push in TNA Impact, whatever. But he's just not worth the hype of being, when worlds collide. Like, okay, it's fucking Dolph. It's the same guy that hasn't been on the show for years and has been doing jobs for the last 6. Like, he's just not as big of a deal as he once was. But if he goes to TNA, that is a great get for them. But I still think he's ending up in AEW with his brother. At Reborn Again, John Ritland from the Twitter machine and on YouTube, Real Honesty with John Ritland. Check him out. We're probably going to do a best of and worst of, potentially, movies of 2023. He's watched a lot of them. We're going to do that podcast at some point next week, so keep an eye out for that before 2023 wraps up. But anyways, first question was, as of now, there are 3 matches announced for World's End, which is 10 days away. That's not a good look for the company, is it? Especially since they're wanting to get a new TV deal. It's not a good look, but listen, at this point, I can't even pretend to be upset because this shit happens all the fucking time, and it's just so annoying. Like, they just can't build a card properly. They did for Full Gear. They gradually announced pay-per-view matches for that show. And I know the Continental Classic has kind of prevented them from announcing more matches because a lot of the matches that would have matches at World's End are probably in that tournament. But there really is no excuse. I mean, there really should be more matches announced. The pay-per-view's in a week and a half. That's just ridiculous to me. I'm sorry. They're going to add another fucking 10 matches. Tony Khan does this all the time. He just doesn't know his right from his left sometimes, and he's just not too involved, but like it seems like he's just too kerfluffled. Is that the right word to use? Like he's just all up in his own shit, and he's just, I don't know if flustered's the right word either, but like, he just seems very disorganized. Like, oh yeah, we got a pay-per-view coming up. We'll announce all these matches the week before. Like, no, like, announce this shit in advance. It's not that difficult. It happens all the time. They did it for All In as well. Like, fucking announce your shit a month out and give people, or at least give us an idea of what to expect. Honestly, it's one thing to have a card where you don't have any matches announced, or most matches not announced, and at least you know where you're going. I still don't know where they're going. I don't know what matches they're going to announce. I look at that card and I'm like, what else can they possibly add? Aside from stuff involving people in the Continental Classic, what other feuds are they really building right now? That is my question, and I don't have an answer. His next question, he says, Merry Christmas to you and Alexis. I appreciate that, John. Merry Christmas to you as well. He says, where do you think Raw will end up by next October? Wouldn't it be funny if WBD bought WWE and brought WWE on, right? Not bought them. Brought WWE on, and AEW had to find another home. I mean, like I said, I don't think funny? No, it would not be funny because I think it would fuck over AEW, and I don't want to see them do worse. I want to see every company do well. I don't think they go to Warner Brothers. Is it completely a dead possibility? No, I think it's actually a pretty real possibility, especially with AEW not doing too hot right now in a couple different areas. I don't think that'll happen. I don't want to see that happen. As far as where Raw ends up, we've already talked about it. I feel like a streaming service might make the most sense. They can cover network TV, cable TV, and then streaming all in one fell swoop with all three of their biggest shows, Raw, SmackDown, and NXT. I feel like they might go to Amazon. Maybe not Disney Plus. That seems weird, but probably Amazon, maybe ESPN Plus, whatever. I don't really want to see that. I'm not really sure how that works. I mean, that could happen, and I could change my tune immediately, saying, listen, this is awesome. I'm glad they did it, whatever. I just don't really see that happening. So, I don't know. I honestly have no real prediction for what's going to happen there. I think they will end up on streaming. Warner Brothers would make for a fucking wild 2024, and I really discount nothing at this point. Like, as far as, oh, could this happen? Oh, there's no chance. You can't say no chance anymore. You can't say no chance to certain things, and we're not Vince McMahon. Oh, no chance in hell. You can't say that anymore. With the shit that's happened in the past year or two in WWE and AEW, you cannot tell me, oh, this is not possible. Anything is possible at this point in time. Punk not only came back to wrestling, but he fucking ditched AEW to go back to WWE, something I never thought would probably happen beyond a potential Hall of Fame induction. So at this point, never say never. His next question, what did you think of Godzilla -1? I know you reviewed it on Letterboxd. I personally thought it was one of the best Godzilla movies ever. It was, and I've seen all the other ones. I haven't seen... That's not true. When I say I've seen the other ones, I'm talking about the legendary ones, the legendary company ones. I saw the first one in 2014, the second one, Godzilla vs. Kong, blah, blah, blah. I like and enjoy those movies. This was better than all of those. I thought it was an amazing movie. If you gave it 5 stars, I wouldn't blame you. I haven't watched the other Godzilla movies that were made in Japan, so I can't really compare it to those. But I've heard it's better than any of those as well, if not one of the best ever. So I did see it. I thought it was excellent, and definitely one of the best movies I've seen all year, for sure. At noob_n_co TV, he says, Merry Christmas to you, Graham. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Your thoughts on Carmelo Hayes' SmackDown debut on Friday? He'll be great on the Blue brand. He might join Bobby in the Street Profits. Yeah, I thought he had a great debut. Carmelo Hayes had a really fun very, very fun match with Grayson Waller. The potential pairing is what I was going to say. With Bobby and the Profits would be intriguing. I mean, that would kind of cover the mid-card scene, would it not? I mean, I think Carmelo Hayes can fly on his own. I do think he can kind of go in there and do the mid-card thing in the United States Championship picture and do well for himself. He can go in there and chase the U.S. Championship. Bobby can chase the World Championship. The Profits can chase the tag titles. Kind of an evolution type thing. I feel like that would make the most sense. I feel like Bobby and the Profits kind of have to go babyface with the reactions they've been getting. And Hayes is probably going heel in NXT pretty soon by turning on Trick Williams. So I don't know if that's going to work out. But I honestly would not be upset at that pairing, also because they did tease it a few months ago on SmackDown. On that one episode of SmackDown where the Profits couldn't make the show, and Hayes and Trick Williams were there instead. I think Montez Ford was sick or something, so they pulled him from the show. Bobby was shown talking to Carmelo Hayes backstage, which was very interesting. They can go back to that and say, listen, I've always been high on you. Come on into our group. That's very possible. His next question, your thoughts on Katana Chance and Kaden Carter as the new WWE Women's Tag Team Champions. I get the feeling that the Kabuki Warriors might win the titles from them in 2024. As for the Unholy Union, I pretty much don't care about them. He's talking about Kaylee Ray and Isla Dawn. I like Kaylee Ray a lot. I don't give a fuck about Isla Dawn, really, personally. She's not bad, but I don't care about her. That team, they got the vignette treatment for months, and then they just disappeared. I don't know what's going on there. But yeah, I think Katana Chance and Kaden Carter, for as little as I care about that tag team division, because they just don't do enough with it for the women's tag team division. It's been a dead division for years. I'm happy for them that they got their moment. They're a very good tag team. That was cool. That being said, I don't think their reign will be very long. I do think it'll be short-lived, and they'll just transition those championships on the Kabuki Warriors probably within the next month and a half or so, if not shorter. I think that's only inevitable. At Wheeljack83, Jeffrey's question here, what's the likelihood of Drew McIntyre leaving WWE? I don't think it's very high. Again, like I just said a minute ago, you can't say never at this point, especially with what's happened in 2023 and in 2022 as well. You can't say, oh, this will never happen. There's no chance of it. I do think there's a chance Drew could leave and go to AEW. Do I think that will happen? No. What I probably think will happen, based on what we've read in reports from Fightful and stuff like that, if he hasn't resigned already, not that he won't, I don't think he will. And honestly, based on the promo he cut on Monday, I think there was a lot of truth in what he said. I think it's very likely that Drew will live up to what he said and leave the company when his contract expires, but not go to AEW. He might just take time off, spend time with family, and then come back to WWE after that. Now, people thought the same thing about Jeff Hardy back in 2009, and then he went to fucking TNA. So, not that Drew's going back to TNA. I mean, I guess he could go back to TNA. He had a lot of time there. He spent a lot of time there in 2015, 2016, 2017. It's not impossible. But I do think Drew will probably let his contract run out, take some time, and then maybe come back to WWE. I think at the end of the day, what company will he sign with? I say WWE, but you can't discount the possibility of him maybe going to AEW instead. Like just trying something new, like Edge did. Edge had no ill will towards WWE, but he wanted to do something different, and he only has so many years left. Drew's obviously a lot younger than Edge, but he has friends in AEW, and maybe he would want a quick run there before going back to WWE in a few years from now. I don't know, but I do think he will go back to WWE after letting his contract run out, taking time off, and then coming back at some point in 2024. That's my prediction. His next question, I mean, it would be pretty wild if he went to AEW in time for All In, too. That would be pretty fucking crazy. And again, not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, there is a chance that he lets his contract run out and you think he might come back to WWE like with Bryan Danielson, and then Bryan Danielson went right to AEW instead. We could see the same thing happen with Drew where his contract runs out and then he just shows up in AEW with All In. What a place to make a debut there. That would be crazy. And again, not impossible. His second question, is Damian Priest ever going to have a successful cash-in? He's held on to that briefcase for quite a while now. I think he will, just because we've had already so many unsuccessful and lackluster cash-ins in the past couple of years. We need a good one. Triple H already fucked it up with Austin Theory, so I can't say that he has a great track record of the cash-ins because he's already had one with the men and he fucked it up. I mean, the women's one with the EO is great. Last year it was... Oh, Triple H wasn't in charge at that point. It was Nikki Cross. No, that was 2 years ago. Liv Morgan was last year, but that was before Triple H took over. But he did do the Theory one, and that sucked. So I can't say the Priest one will be better. I'm going to make a bold prediction and say he will cash in successfully, but it won't be until after WrestleMania. I think at this rate, honestly, just keep the tag titles on Balor and Priest and have them face and lose the tag titles to DIY at WrestleMania. And then maybe the night after WrestleMania, after CM Punk maybe becomes World Heavyweight Champion, you can have Damian Priest cash in on Punk. And then Punk's reign lasts all of 1 day, or 2 days, or whatever. Honestly, I think that'd be pretty cool. Gets the belt on Priest, puts Punk back in chase mode for a little bit longer. I would not have an issue with that at all. And then the last question comes from @U13A. Their question was, speaking of CM Punk, do you think CM Punk would have won the WWE World Heavyweight Championship had he stayed in 2014? Probably, but let's look at it this way. So he lost the WWE Championship in early 2013. And then he wasn't back in the title hunt until, really at all actually, until he left. He never went back in the championship picture. But I think that was all, not by design, but like, I do think they were giving him time away from the title picture because he was going to get back in the championship picture at some point down the road. In 2014, it sounded like, you said if he stayed in 2014. Like, are we saying stayed in general and re-signed for another couple of years? Because had he not walked out in 2014 in January, it sounds like he was going to let his contract run out in the summer of 2014. He would have left at that point. So he would have left eventually. If you're saying he stayed in general and did not leave at all, in 2014, I don't think he would have gotten the championship that year. We only had one world title after TLC 2013, which was almost 10 years ago at this point, which is crazy. We just passed the anniversary a few days ago. And then after that, so Orton was champion. Orton lost. He would have lost it to Batista, and Batista would have been champion. And this is if Punk didn't leave. Because remember, the original plan had Punk not left. I don't think Daniel Bryan would have gotten the main event of WrestleMania had Punk stayed. So it would have been Punk and Triple H. Punk would have beaten Triple H, obviously. Batista would have won the championship. And Daniel Bryan would have done whatever the fuck he was doing with Sheamus at that WrestleMania. Brock probably, honestly, I don't think the Punk thing changed anything. Brock probably still would have broken the streak. So they probably would have done, honestly, Batista and Brock at... Batista would not have been champion long term. Because he was only back for a short time. He was doing the Guardians of the Galaxy thing. He left in June of that year. They would have given Brock the belt either before SummerSlam or at SummerSlam itself. And Brock would have been champion until Mania 31. So, no, I don't think Punk actually, had he stayed and re-signed for another few years, he would have been champion that year. Because Batista would have been champion and then probably Brock. Could Punk have been the one to dethrone Brock? Yes, that's very possible. Probably at WrestleMania 31. But at that point, you also had the Shield really rising up. It could have been the same outcome with just Rollins cashing in on Brock and Roman in that triple threat at Mania 31, and Punk may not have been involved at all. But I think either way, if we're talking strictly 2014, if he stayed in 2014, I don't know if you're saying if he would have won the championship that year or in general. In general, probably yes. He probably would have gotten one more run at some other point in the years that followed, especially when the brand split was brought back in 2016, which probably still would have happened. I don't think that really would have changed things, Punk being there. Would he have won the championship in 2014 itself? Probably not, no. And that's going to do it, guys, for episode 525 of Hashtag AskGSM here today for Wednesday, December 20th, 2023. Thank you guys, as always, for sending in the questions. I appreciate it. If you want to send in a question to the show, you can do so by tweeting me on the Twitter machine at WrestleRant with Hashtag AskGSM. Find me on Facebook as well, facebook.com/Graham.gsm.Matthews. Drop a comment on the post I usually put up on Tuesday nights, if not on the wall itself. Be sure to drop a question on this very video in the comment section down below, and I'll be sure to include your question in next week's edition. Have an awesome one, guys. Have a very Merry Christmas and a very happy holiday as well. We'll check back in with you next week here on the show and the final episode of Hashtag AskGSM in 2023. Until then, guys, have an awesome one. I'm Graham GSM Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the reindeer road.